Hello and welcome to Crisis What Crisis, a new podcast series designed to be a useful field guide as we all try to navigate and come to terms with a dramatically changed world. Whether personal, professional or both, crisis is without doubt a new shared experience. I'm Andy Coulson, a former newspaper editor, Downing Street Director of Communications and inmate of HMP Belmarsh. For the last 4 years I've been trying to put all my experience, the good and the bad, to use as a strategic advisor to business leaders. And I can tell you that the bad has been just as useful as the good. And that got me thinking that there are plenty of great podcasts out there where you can hear stories of success. There are far fewer where you can benefit from the experience of those whose lives have properly unravelled. So in Crisis What Crisis, I'll be talking to the embattled, shamed, courageous, ruined, damaged, resilient, unlucky and lucky survivors of crisis. Some names will be familiar, some less so. But our guests will talk about their experiences honestly, often with humour, but always in the hope that what they have to share might be useful to anyone facing down their own demons and challenges. Put simply, these are crisis stories worth sharing. Welcome to episode 6 of Crisis What Crisis. I hope that the stories you've heard so far that have ranged across the personal and the professional have been useful and provided some perspective. Today, I'm joined by Victoria Milligan, a woman who has endured what I think all of our guests to date would agree is a challenge of a different order. That she would tell you that crisis is not a competition speaks to her unbelievable spirit and provides a clue to the approach she took to her life after 4 p.m. on May the 5th, 2013. The moment that she, husband Nico and their 4 children were thrown out of a speeding boat whilst on holiday in Cornwall. Nico was killed, as was 8-year-old Emily. Their son Kit, then aged 4, was badly injured, and Victoria herself lost her left leg. An unimaginable set of traumas which, even as I say them now, are hard to really comprehend. And yet, 7 years on, Victoria has more than survived. She's a motivational speaker, writer, and is now training to be a therapist. She's also an ambassador for Child Bereavement UK and has raised over £1 million for them and Cornwall Air Ambulance. Victoria hates the phrase moved on because that suggests that Nicko and Emily have been left behind. Instead, she says that she and daughters Amber, Olivia and son Kit are going forwards with Nicko and Emily still very much part of their lives. What is also remarkable is Victoria's determination to share her story in the straightforward, selfless hope that others might learn and benefit from it. And not just the story of her grief, but also her survival. The methods and strategies that she's deployed so effectively to allow her and her children to live on and to thrive. Victoria, thank you for joining me today. How are you?
Thanks, Andy. I am good, thank you. I'm actually off to Cornwall on Friday, so it's always quite an emotional time, the lead up to going back to the place where we had our holiday home, and obviously the worst thing that ever happened in my life did happen. And I sometimes question why I still go down, but I didn't want there to be anywhere that we couldn't go. There was a kind of black spot, and I didn't think it was giving the children a great sort of script to show that you don't face your fears. So I do feel slightly kind of anxious, I would say, this week, because I've worked out the run-up to events is often worse than the actual event itself. So hopefully when I get there, it will be good, but it is always daunting, the thought of seeing where something so horrific happened.
But you're very much part of the community down there, aren't you? It's a terrifically important, obviously, place for you, but it's also, I imagine, a very sort of reassuring place to be in a way.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we don't own a second home down there now. We did, but we're very much welcomed and looked after by the locals, and anyone that knows that part of the world knows that the Cornish are often not as welcoming to tourists as they might be, but they're so lovely and kind, and it does really feel like a second home. And we had, as you said in that introduction, that I do feel that Nicko and Emily kind of move forward with us in our lives, and we had so many happy memories down there that to block off somewhere that was such a happy part of our life feels like the wrong thing to do, even though I do arrive and get a bit of a kind of stab in the heart of woe, kind of memories coming flooding back. But then we'll look at the favourite beach where Emily used to love kind of, paddling in the rock pools, and the golf course where Nico used to love playing golf. And of course, they're both buried down there at St Enedoc. So we'll go and visit their graves and have picnics and try and, as much as possible, remember the happy moments, because even though two of the most precious people have been taken away from us, no one can take away what we had with them.
One common factor that's emerging in the conversations that we've had so far around this issue of crisis are the clues from life before, if you like, that resilience is something that develops. It's not a skill that you suddenly learn, or a switch that you can flick. When you look at your younger self, long before the accident, does that strike a chord?
Yes, no, definitely. And I totally agree with that. I've done a lot of work recently, actually, with a therapist that I've been working with about sort of identity and who am I now, when I was happily married, mother of 4, and now I'm sole parent, widow, bereaved parent. Which area of work do I go back into? And we've done a lot of kind of soul searching and looking back into my past and my parenting and, the script that my parents kind of gave me. And I mean, my mum was an incredible figure. She died, unfortunately, just in January. But
I'm sorry.
A long battle with cancer. And she grew up in the back streets of Birkenhead. I grew up in the Wirral, 2 up, 2 down, 5 children, alcoholic parents. So she was a survivor. She had resilience with a capital R. She was amazing. And then lived a very lovely life with my dad, who had started a company and done quite well. But she was very much, you don't take anything for granted and you work really hard for things. And she was a bit of a tiger mum, I think, before tiger mums were a thing. So there was 4 hours of piano practice. There was, tennis every night, because you're not going to be successful at something if you don't work super hard. So I think I got a lot of strength from her. And I'm very grateful, actually, for the way that she's brought me up in terms of the kind of characteristics that she's given me about perseverance. You make a choice. If you want something and you want to do something, you have to make a choice. You set your goal and then you work towards that goal. You work out what the path is, and then you are successful in it if you put the time and effort into it. And I think I've definitely taken that from her, because when you are in crisis or something out of the blue happens, we do have a choice. The choice is you crumble, or you live a lesser life than you were before. You try and numb the pain through anesthetizing, through busyness or drink or drugs or exercise or whatever it is, or you make a choice that you are going to survive, and you don't know how you're going to do it, but you know that you are going to do it.
It's not just survive, though, is it? It's the thrive piece that you seem to have done such a remarkable job of embracing.
I do call it surviving and thriving. I think what I've done for the past 7 years, because I very much felt in the first few years I was just surviving. I was sort of like a bit of a robot going through the motions of life and parenting and food and choosing schools, and there was no joy, there was no fun, and it was such a contrast to our life before, which was happy and upbeat and positive and joyous. And I thought, this is just not fair on them, it's not fair on me. We'd had such an incredible life and we'd worked so hard to have a good life with Nicko and Emily, and yes, they're not here, and that is desperately sad, but they are never going to be here physically, and we have to try and find a way of sort of honouring their memory and living a great life without them physically present. And that's what I've tried really hard to do over the last 7 years. And I think, having done so much work into looking into my past and my parents and what they have shown me on how to live a life, which was, make a choice, challenges, work hard, but also a lot of fun and love and joy. I want my children to have that script as well, so they know when they grow up that is what life is about. You work hard at things, you work on your resilience, you work on adaptability, which is what we've all had to work on. But there is fun and joy if you put the effort in and face those emotions.
You married Nico in 1999. He was a very dynamic, successful guy working for Sky TV. You were working as a personal trainer, 4 fantastic kids. You lived in London, spending a lot of time down in Cornwall, as you've described. you've said yourself it was a perfect life, but what's very clear is that you and Nico fully appreciated it. You said at the time of the accident, I think perhaps even on the day of the accident, and Nico sort of was very clear about how truly happy he was that at the age of 51 that he'd made it. That must be, an enormous comfort for you as you've tried to deal with these traumas.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And the day of the accident, we were having fish and chips in Padstow, takeaway, Rick Stein's on the boat. And he had been down there as a teenager. So he used to go down when he was kind of 15, 16, 17. He said, if a 17-year-old me could see me now, he'd think I'd done pretty well. And it does give me great comfort because we got married when I was 29, he was 39. We met when I was 26, he was 36. So he was slightly older. He'd seen all his friends get married and have kids. He'd been that slightly sad single person going away with all his mates and their kids on holiday. And he was so happy to have met me, to have got married, to have these 4 amazing children, that I think he just never thought he was going to achieve that. And as you said, he was very successful and very respected in his work life as well. So I think in a way where so many people are striving for more and they don't think they're good enough, that he very much realized that he was, and his life was good enough, and he didn't need more. He had us. We'd worked hard on building this incredible life together, and we really loved each other and loved our life. And as you say, it does give me great comfort thinking he was taken away from us way too soon. 51 is too young to die, but he had achieved so much in life and died a happy man.
3 years after the accident, Victoria, you gave a TED talk down in Truro. And I would urge anyone who's listening to this podcast to find another 18 minutes in their life to watch that talk on YouTube, because it is, I think, in and of itself a testimony to the strength of human spirit. But can I ask you, Victoria, to talk us through what happened that day?
Yes. We were down in Cornwall on the first May bank holiday in 2013. We'd had a holiday house down there for about 4 years, and we'd bought a rib speedboat the year before. Nico's kind of pride and joy, absolutely loved it. We'd had so much fun on it, driving, going to see coves that you can't get to by car or foot. And we took it out that Sunday, and we weren't doing anything different than we'd done any other weekend. It was a beautiful, beautiful day. First time we'd taken it out that year. We'd had an amazing morning, kind of, rock climbing on Damon Bay and splashing in the sea. And we were just having a really lovely bank holiday family weekend together. We took the boat out at lunchtime, took it over to Padstow, as I said, for Rick Stein's fish and chips on the quay, and then took it up and down the Camel Estuary towards kind of Polzeath and back. And it was just a magical time with everyone was on a real sort of high. The sun was on our faces. We were riding the waves, kids just screaming with delight. Nico absolutely loving it. And it just all started to go wrong when I realised the tide was going out and we should get back to shore. We moored our boat in rock. And we were all, as I said, on such a high. I think one of the kids shouted, "Let's go round again, let's go round again." And it was that sort of fateful turn that a too fast push on the accelerator and a slip on the wheel caused our boat to go into a sort of wheelie. I found out afterwards from the Marine Investigation Board. So it reared up, and as it tried to right itself, it slammed down onto the water, causing similar G-force to a jumbo jet taking off. So the 6 of us were flung into the freezing cold water, all in life jackets. The kill cord hadn't been attached to either of us, so that's the safety device that stops the boat when someone goes away from the engine, from the controls. The first thing I saw when I came up was the boat going around in very tight turns. So it was just a perfect storm of events with kill cord, tide going out, slip on the accelerator, and the boat just kept coming back at us in very, very tight, very fast circles. So it was...
How close were you as a group? I mean,
I don't really remember because it was very loud. Obviously, we were kind of in the water, so you could just kind of see heads. I think we were all just looking at the boat. We can't have been that far away from each other, and it was complete random who got hit and who didn't get hit. I thought potentially it was just me and Kit. We were quite close to each other because I've been holding him, who were in danger. He was shouting, "No more cold water, mummy, no more cold water." He was terrified. He was 4. So I just swam to him and thought if I can move us towards the beach, but you can't swim very far in a life jacket. Sometimes I like to think maybe I swam enough to save our lives. I probably moved maybe a metre. But I remember turning around as the boat came round and not feeling the propeller cut my leg, but feeling the hull of the boat completely wind me in the chest. So it was obviously very close, and I thought Kit had lost his foot because his white trainer was on the surface of the sea. It was only later that I realised my leg had been very badly cut. But as I said, it was so noisy and loud, and adrenaline is just pumping through your body at that time, and almost a kind of stubbornness of this will all be fine, it will all be okay, it will all be okay. I couldn't hear any screaming or anything. The RNLI boat came alongside ours, and a very brave crew member jumped into our boat to stop the engine. And then it was kind of weirdly, eerily quiet. Again, I didn't really know where anybody was. I was quite badly injured, so I remember seeing quite a lot of blood in the water, not knowing if it was coming from me or Kit, because I couldn't actually feel anything because of the cold. And again, as I said, adrenaline is kind of pumping through your body. I do then remember hearing Amber shouting, "Daddy's dead, Daddy's dead." So 12-year-old girl who had seen Nico in the water doesn't really bear thinking about. And we were then rescued by the RNLI. But it's a weird thing when I think about adrenaline, that I remember even in the water, when I'd heard Amber shout this, that I was thinking, okay, so I'm now a widow. My leg's not looking great, so I'm probably going to lose that. That's fine. I'll just get a prosthetic leg. I will move house. We'll get some money, so we'll sell our house. We'll move there. I'll go back to work. And so planning my life within those kind of 5 minutes on my own, kind of going in and out of a coma, consciousness, with kind of losing quite a lot of blood. And I do kind of look back, and you hear those stories, don't you, about kind of farmers in fields losing arms and crawling towards help. But it is that human survival instinct is so incredibly powerful, and it wants you to survive. It is an innate thing within us that we need to survive. And that has carried on over the last 7 years, that even though I wasn't in that complete crisis situation, I know that inside of me, my innate human nature wants me to survive this, and has helped me survive this. Yes. There are a lot of kind of tools that I have learned along the way that we all will help us with resilience and survival, but we are made to survive and adapt.
So as you're taken to hospital in Plymouth, I think, aren't you?
It was Derriford, so it was in Plymouth, Derriford.
So, you know, the sort of common view of crisis is that to cope with it, or to get to the point of being able to cope with it, you must accept the position that you're in. You know, that you need to be somehow present in the situation. And that was obviously an impossibility for you. In the days and weeks after the accident, how is it when you look back that you managed to function? You talk about that sort of survival instinct, but how did you function? How did you cope?
I think when I look back at it, that initial aftermath, obviously a huge amount of shock, morphine. I had 2 operations, one to amputate my leg, another one to kind of tidy it up, and then I had more when I came back to St Mary's. But there was obviously a lot of kind of physical trauma that I had to go through. I was so desperately worried for the children. Kit, they didn't amputate his leg there. He had one more nerve attached to me, so his leg was kind of pink. His foot was pink, where mine was sort of grey. Amber had a massive, like, circular cut from the propeller on her thigh, so she was very close to losing her leg. She nearly lost a finger. Olivia wasn't harmed, but obviously suffering quite a lot of kind of trauma and memory. So I think I just went into maternal mode of thinking, oh my God, these three little beings, they were like 12, 10 and 4. And again, that kind of tiger mum thing kicks in of I've just sure they're okay. They've lost so much. And also it didn't feel real. When you talk about acceptance, as you said, I didn't accept for a long time what happened to me. That took me a huge amount of time. Acceptance. And, you know, again, as I said, I was in a kind of huge amount of shock, and there wasn't time for me to accept what had happened. It was just trying to kind of deal with the day to day. It was that incredibly small steps, and that's another kind of mantra that I've taken forward with me, of just getting to the next hour, waiting till someone could come and wash my hair. I couldn't do anything. I was completely immobile. I was either lying in my bed or in a wheelchair. I had to ask someone to help me to go to the loo, someone to wash my hair, someone to take me up to the other floor to see my children. So in a way, when we're all slightly used to being in control, I suddenly wasn't in control of anything. So everything took so much time. I just remember wanting everything to kind of hurry up. Time takes on such a weird, I don't know, it's a bizarre thing, time, when you've been in crisis. I remember looking in the clock on the wall and just thinking, like, how is time even still going? Nico and Emily are dead. They're not here. Surely time has to stop. Does no one know that they're not here? And then sometimes seconds would be hours, but then hours could be minutes. It was just so bizarre. But I just tried to focus on hour by hour by hour to get through those initial horrific weeks.
Did you try to sort of consciously set the grief to one side, if you like? Because that's, you know, in the introduction, I said that it's just so difficult to comprehend, because you're dealing with so much, you know, almost in a split second, every element of your life has changed. Were you sort of consciously setting the grief aside at that period, do you think? This is in the sort of first early weeks after the accident, or did you find that the two things were, because you had so much kind of practical and your own physical health, but also Kit, of course, very badly injured, and the other injuries that you described, were those two things sort of merging, if you like, or were you able to compartmentalize them? Was that one of the methods that you used to kind of cope?
I very much remember thinking, it's too enormous to deal with in my mind. I was so busy with physio appointments, prosthetic appointments, hand appointments for Amber. Kit had 20 operations after the accident, so we were being ferried back and forwards to St Mary's. Sometimes he'd have his leg pinned back together, it wouldn't work, they'd unpin it. So the trauma and worry about that was horrific. They didn't even know if they could mend his leg or not. The reality of the situation slowly started to seep in, but I was interviewed by police, Marine Investigation Board. I had to deal with probate, estate. As you can imagine, hundreds of people wanted to come around all the time. It was so full on, and I remember being terrified of the grief, absolutely terrified of it, because to lose not only Nico but Emily as well, and two very different losses as well. And I think that's taken me a long time to actually cope with them as individual losses, because losing a child is very different to losing a husband. You know, I adored and love Nico, as I've said, but you know, child is part of you. You've grown them for 9 months. You've given birth to them. They are a massive just loss of potential.
Part of you, yeah.
They're part of you, and anybody who's ever lost a child, I think, will agree that I think it's the worst human pain anyone can go through. You're constantly looking at their friends and their peers, kind of wondering what they're doing. What would she be like now? She'd be turning 16 in August. It's a horrific pain to go through, and one that I will never ever get over, which I think is why I hate that phrase, kind of moving on or getting over, because why should I get over it? You know, grief is the honour of the love we had for those people, and grief is deeper and lasts longer for someone that it's all relative, your level of grief to the level of love you had for that person. And
Yeah.
That's I will never get over really losing them.
So something else that's come up in the conversations that we've had about crisis is the sort of power of denial. That as a long-term strategy, of course, it's not necessarily the right one, but as a coping strategy, it can be incredibly powerful. Is that what you're saying, really, in those early stages, perhaps even over a fairly long period of time? You recognize that I can't try and make sense of something so senseless, and so
Yeah,
the denial becomes a tool, if you like.
I think sense is a good word, because I would wake up and only had to look at my leg that wasn't there to know that the accident had happened. But as I said, I took so much time to get to acceptance, and I had a lot of help with a grief counsellor. I had the boat going round and round in my head every night for about 6 months, and I was still trying to stop the accident happening in my head. I was still shouting at me and Nico to kind of sit down, don't try and make the turn, don't listen to them. Just sit back down, just go straight back. I'd wake up in a sweat, just screaming at myself, because I could not accept that this horrific thing had happened to us. And you're right, you can't ever kind of live in the present or the future until you've accepted the past. And I didn't want to accept the past. That was the problem. I didn't want to accept that it had happened. And then it takes a long time for your emotions to catch up with the reality of what might have happened physically. So yeah, that one day, 4 p.m, Monday the 5th of May, that awful accident happened and I lost my leg, Nicko and Emily. I don't even know if I've accepted totally now that it's fully happened. It kind of, as you say, makes no sense. It's not like we were out doing anything particularly wrong. We were out having a gorgeous family holiday. So I think I don't know if it was denial or it was just very much knowing that I could not cope with kids' operations, my leg, my children, choosing schools, being a parent, whilst dealing with grief at the same time. Yes. So I knew at some point I would have to, but then it was not the right time to do that.
The worst kind of prioritization is what you had to is what you had to do. Yeah.
Exactly. I knew I was capable of doing what I was doing at that time. I didn't know I was capable of grief because, as I said, I was utterly terrified of it. But like anything, I think once you start to understand the path of something, and so grief is amazing. Again, it's human survival instinct that your body only gives you as much pain as you can deal with, I think physically and emotionally. So once I started to let a little bit of grief seep in for Nico or Emily, and horrificness, and looking at their photos and, you know, happy times we'd had before, it does then pull away and lets you get on with your day-to-day life. So it is that whole oscillating between desperate missing and wanting to hug and kiss and read Emily one more bedtime story, but then dealing with cooking dinner or going to Sainsbury's or taking dogs for a walk. You know, you have to get on with your normal life, and it's not like you're in grief, in the depths of grief all the time. I felt I would kind of be in it, and I'd process a few more emotions and you know, think about them a little bit more, but then I just have to get on with normal life, and that has been grief. And as time goes on, those horrific black moments of grief are slightly less and maybe slightly last for less long and aren't as painful, and then the good kind of moments probably last for a bit longer. So that for me has been the path of grief.
Perspective, of course, is another box that must be ticked when dealing with crisis. This, you know, this idea that things could always be worse. Again, you know, a near impossible place for you, Victoria, to get to, I imagine.
Yeah, it is really. I mean, I did go to see one agent for public speaking who said, well, you know, there are people here that might have been shot in the head and lost 2 arms and 1 leg, you know, kind of what makes you so special. It was kind of like, okay, yeah, no, I could have lost 2 legs, I suppose, but it couldn't really be any worse. It is, you know, and I quite often think, gosh, what if we come back from Cornwall and I just lost my leg? That would have been massive. Or lost Nico or lost Emily, but all 3 together, so enormous. And I think that's why I didn't really know where to start. And as I say, it's only recently that I've started to look at each loss on its own.
Yes.
Because even my leg was like, lost my leg, whatever. That's just so irrelevant compared to losing my husband and my child. But of course, it is a massive thing because I have to learn to walk again, and I get rubbed and sores, and it hurts. And I had 2 legs for 41 years, so suddenly having to put on a prosthetic leg and deal with all of that is hard, and that is my day-to-day life. But I'd sort of dimmed it down as, whatever, I've just kind of lost my leg as well. And the Paralympics make it all look very easy on these blades and what have you, but it isn't easy, and you have to be very careful and very aware of skin and rubbing and sores. And then I can't wear my leg, and I'm back in a wheelchair, so it's another sort of huge thing. But perspective is difficult. I think perspective going forward for me, I don't sweat the small stuff anymore. I look back at the old me, and who used to slightly worry a bit more about how blonde my hair was, or if we were going to make the kids' swimming lesson on time, or which particular villa we should choose. I don't know. I mean, I'm making light of it, but now it's more about happiness. I look at all of us, and I want us to be happy. I really do, and I think we owe it to Nicko and Emily to live a happy life, because they can't. They don't have that time, and we do have the time to do it. And we work hard as a team, I would say, the 4 of us, of deciding what to do, where to go, how we remember them on the hard days. We've got Emily's birthday coming up, as I said. We've got Nico's birthday in September, what we do. And it's very much together as a little kind of group effort that we work hard at it.
The practical impacts, never mind the emotional, were of course enormous. The admin of grief, as you've described it, must have been utterly wretched to navigate. I mean, the inquest, of course, which is a very kind of public event, if you like, must have been incredibly difficult to cope with. Yeah. How did you approach that?
I mean, it's all a bit of a blur, I think, looking back at that. I remember giving my statement the day after and feeling quite lucid about it, quite clear. Is that the right word, lucid? And I look back at the inquest and having to, stand up in front of those people. And I mean, that boat was out of control. That could have killed other people. And looking back at that is so horrific. I mean, it killed my husband and my daughter, and it is just the worst thing that has happened and could have ever have happened. It was so horrific, but it did happen. I think the amount of times I've said in the last 7 years, we are where we are. There is nothing we can do about it. It has happened, and we have to try and make the best going forward from here. We did due diligence, we looked into everything, but as you said, probate, estate, no one expects to die at 51. No one has everything completely in order at 51. There's a lot of loose ends to tie up, and finances and everything. It's been really, really tough, and we were quite a traditional couple. We shared the load, but I mainly did sort of house and family and holidays and schools, and Nico kind of did the work and the finances, and I've had to take on everything. And it's exhausting. There is always something to do, and I used to get really upset by it when I thought there was a job that Nico should do. That made me kind of slightly miss him even more, and actually get a bit angry, like, why are you not here? Even if it's, I don't know, jet washing the patio or fixing a shower, or sky broke, he would be the one that would do the sky or the Sonos. But I slowly had to just learn how to do everything and look at all jobs as a job. It's not a man's job or a girl's job. It's just a job that has to be done in the house. And the kids have had to get a lot better in helping me out, and they have been amazing. And they wrote me a Father's Day card this year. I found Father's Day a bit difficult, and I absolutely burst into tears.
Oh, my word.
You have been the best father and mother to us.
Oh, my word. The bond between you, having that kind of unimaginable shared experience, the bond between you must be incredible.
Yeah, exactly. And I hope I have shown them a script that we can cope with anything. Life is not always a bed of roses. There are awful things that happen. I think there's very few people that probably get to 40s, 50s who haven't suffered something, And as I said to you, I don't think there's a competition in crisis. I think it's how we as individuals cope with it. And I think there are very much lessons learned that we can share with each other, which is what you're doing with your podcast, about how to get through very challenging times.
What advice would you give to anyone who finds himself in the sort of orbit of loss or grief, if I can put it that way? What do people suffering, shock in the way that you and your family were, what do they need from friends and relatives? You've talked about how some people sort of struggled with it around you. They didn't quite know how to behave. Even people sort of crossing the street to avoid you. What advice would you give to people who find themselves in that situation?
I would say, so for people suffering, shock or crisis or trauma or loss, you've got to be hugely self-compassionate. And that took me a long time to learn, berating myself for not doing enough, still being in bed at like 11 and not even having breakfast or washing my hair. You've just got to be so kind to yourself, because grief is exhausting. Trauma is exhausting. Any form of loss is absolutely, horrific. And we can't focus as much, we can't process so much, and of course we can't get as much done in our day-to-day lives. So definitely self-compassion, self-care. I was very conscious I had to keep my batteries fully charged, kind of physically and emotionally. And that for me, as a personal trainer, exercise has been a massive part of my survival. I just think if I can start the day with something positive, whether it's a run or sitting on my bike or circuit training class, the rest of the day is kind of shaped up well, because I've done something good for myself and my emotions, and I've released some cortisol, I've some adrenaline, and there's so much energy, and it can be bad energy running around your body when you are going through grief, that if you can kind of get rid of some of that excess energy through doing something positive is really good. I didn't drink for a year because I just thought actually hangovers and grief, probably not a great mix. And I drove everywhere, and I wanted to escape also if I was at a dinner or a drink or something, if someone had said something completely unintentionally, but that upset me. I didn't want to be that person that everyone suddenly had to look after, that broke down with kind of flood of tears.
Victoria, this is you're being very self-effacing about all this, as though this is a kind of natural set of decisions that one might make, and they're not, right? I mean, most people absolutely would not be making these kind of rational, and they're the right decisions, obviously, but in the circumstances that you found yourself, the fact that you were doing that is astonishing. What do you? I mean, can you sort of attribute that to a particular mindset, or I mean, how? I guess that's what I'm asking, because that's what the podcast is attempting to deliver, I suppose, is the how, as much as the what. So when you just described there, I'm going to start my day with a bit of exercise. You've lost your leg.
I know.
I don't think anyone would have forgiven you for saying, do you know what? I think maybe that's not the thing I'm going to do.
I know. But then if I hadn't, I would be in a much worse position. So maybe I am too controlling in a way, but I have just worked out what works for me. And I think that's what we all have to do as individuals. We have to work out what works for us, because grief is incredibly individual. I read so many books to try and help me through it. And, they kind of say, well, 18 months on, you should be over your grief. And, grief is not linear. All the different emotions that you go through, acceptance, fear, anger, they come and go. It's not that you tick one off and you go, right, I've done anger now. I get angry all the time that I've been in this situation, or that Nico's not here, or that Emily's not here. But I've learned what works for me. It's definitely small steps. It is step by step by step. I don't try and overface myself with anything, because I know that leads to anxiety, and I can't function when I'm kind of very anxious. But But I also look back and think, Nico and I were very, very happy. We've talked about that. So emotionally, I was at the top of my game. I hadn't gone through a toxic divorce. I hadn't been in a bad relationship where I'd been put down, and I wasn't feeling very self-confident or very strong. So I was coming from a position of a very strong, emotional, supportive relationship. So I was in a good place physically and emotionally. And as I've said to you before, my childhood upbringing of, kind of being strong and resilient has helped me cope with what I've coped with as well. Don't get me wrong, there are dark days, let me tell you. It's not all, I get up and I go for a run and I go for a bike ride. I might do that and then feel absolutely dreadful for the rest of the day because I'm just feeling desperately sad, because
Yes.
it is desperately sad. And I think you just have to be very honest. And that's what I've said to people. Don't try and make me feel better if I don't want to be made to feel better. Sometimes I just want you to come around and give me a hug and sit there in silence, just listen to me cry. I just don't want to be on my own. But you've got to just be honest about what it is. It is a really sad situation
that's what I mean about the people in the orbit, really, of your grief, and how people should behave around you. And that's what you need, really, is for people to be there with you, but also understand when, frankly, when you don't want them there, or that you don't want to talk about it. You don't want to. It's not something today that you want to relive or pour over, or maybe on another day it is.
Exactly, and also that it's not about them. Some people will kind of take that as a personal affront that you don't want to see them, but one thing I have learned is that you've slightly got to be in control of it, because at the beginning it was all, that sort of level of trauma brings a sort of fame, and everybody wants to come and make sure you're okay, and even people you haven't seen for ages. And I really had to manage people coming round. And as you said, you're reliving it all the time. I just want to have a recording because everyone wants to know, how am I? How's Kit? How's the leg? How's Amber? And I just felt like I was kind of like a news station kind of all the time. Yeah. Whereas I was trying to coping with and change over joint names on O2 from Nico to my name, all that sort of horrific admin, as you say, that kind of goes on. But I think I learned to just be really honest with people and just say, do you know what? I'm feeling really, really awful today and I don't want to see anybody. Or I do feel like having some company. Bring some sushi, come over, have a glass of wine, or just sit there while I sort of rant a bit, and don't try and come and make me feel better when I don't want to be made to feel better.
The brilliant grief counsellor Julia Samuel found you, I think, once you were back in London. How quickly were you able to embrace the benefits of counselling?
It did take me a while. I sort of sent her away when she first came to see me at St Mary's. I thought, well, how on earth can you help? All I want is Nicko and Emily back. And if you can't bring them back, then absolutely no point in you being here whatsoever. I phoned her probably a couple of weeks. That would be about 2 months after the accident, because the children were starting to ask me questions that I didn't feel skilled enough to answer. And so I sort of asked her for advice around that. So I suppose our relationship starts to develop around helping me answer children, because children are very black and white. They kind of, they always talk about grief with children of jumping in and out of puddles. So they'll 1 minute be kind of absolutely crying, going, oh my God, Dad, miss Daddy. And then the next minute they'll be jumping on the trampoline with their friends, laughing. And then they'll come in and go, well, who's going to walk me down the aisle now? And self-play. And I just found it quite difficult to know what to say to them. But it did take me, I'm going to say, probably, they say with grief counselling that actually don't even start to think about it until 12 weeks after a loss, because it's until the shock has worn off. But obviously for me, I think the shock was so enormous. I think I waited about 6 to 7 months and then started to see Julia quite regularly, and had a couple of years with her. She was absolutely incredible, amazing woman. And we just faced what it was. We would sit there and just swear at each other and go, this is shit, because you've got to actually just name it. And that's the only way, by being honest about how you feel and being brave enough to share the emotions is really one of the only ways that we can go forward. So I had to learn to be brave, to share not just the sad emotions, but the anger emotions. Or, you know, I've said this before, I wish I'd been the one that died, because it was so painful. I didn't want to deal with that grief, and the leg and the children. I didn't feel strong enough, and I thought, well, maybe Nico would be better at dealing with it. You know, they're horrible emotions to admit to, but you're feeling them. So if you're feeling it, you've got to actually process it and share it. And I could share it with Julia, because she just let me say whatever I was inside, and not bottling it up.
As you said earlier, you know, in an instant you'd become a widow, a bereaved parent, a single parent, an amputee, all of these things all at once. How have you sort of worked to kind of address that kind of identity issues, if you like?
It's been really, really hard. It's been a long old journey. I don't know if I'm there now, but it, you know, as I said, we've worked so hard to kind of create this family, and I was this busy, you know, mother, 4 young children, and then it was a bit, well, who am I now? You know, what do I do now? And so I did struggle. I went back into advertising for a bit, and, you know, again, perspective. When I was in there, I was thinking, I've been through so much, and actually I don't care enough about this brand winning this award, and I shouldn't be doing this if I don't care enough. This is not my purpose.
Yeah.
My purpose is helping other people really cope with what they have been through, and that is what has led me to my journey of again, physical kind of motivating people. As you said, I'm an amputee. I want to motivate other people to kind of find their level. We can all do something physically, but also, you know, starting this therapy course. I just think, obviously, my credentials come from having been through something horrific, but I do really want.
And this is to train as a grief counsellor,
as a therapist, probably specialising in grief, also identity and parenting, because I think so much of what we learn from our parents, what we teach our children, shapes their future and who they are as people. And I think that is such an important part of parenting. You know, I don't want to mess them up. I don't want them to ever think, well, you know, I'm 28 and I dropped out of everything because this horrific thing happened to me and my mum couldn't cope with it. That I don't want that to be them. I want them to be, you know, people that have experienced something awful in life, but have learned so much from that experience and that emotion, and they know who their true, authentic self is.
I mean, you've already been a counsellor, of course, you know, since the accident, to your 3 children and no doubt other members of your family. You know, how do you approach the you know, the kind of event itself with your family now? Do you still sort of go back to the day, other than when you know, are talking to people like me and explaining it, because that's, as you say, part of your sort of purpose now? But do you still talk about the day? Is that an important thing, or not?
We don't talk about the day. No. I mean, we have done a lot. You know, it's 7 years ago, and my eldest still gets flashbacks. She will talk about them. They're all, you know, as I said, it's very personal. They're all so completely different. She is a bit like me. She likes talking. She's very emotive. She will sort of process. She's a therapist as well, which she finds incredibly useful. The day was so horrific. We haven't blocked it, because I think, again, that's not a good thing, but it's not going to come up in a day-to-day, you know, conversation. Unless Amber wants to talk about flashbacks that she's having, then I will sit and listen to whatever she wants to say. No, it's more, you know, we will talk about, it's not just grieving for those 2 people. I think what's been interesting this year, with the 7th anniversary of the accident in May, and in fact, Julia Samuels has written a brilliant book called This Too Shall Pass. And she talks in it about our emotions having to have time to catch up with any change. So you can get married and sign a marriage certificate, but your emotions about actually now becoming a wife or a husband could take a lot longer than that 1 second that you sign the marriage certificate. And the same with us. But she does say it takes about between 7 and 10 years for you to fully adapt to a situation. And I do agree with that. I do feel at this 7-year period that I've finally reached a moment of acceptance. I think we're all in a good place, whatever that is. I think we all know this horrific thing has happened. We all grieve for the life that we had with them. And that is hard going forwards because they should still be part of our lives. And so we grieve for the future we should have had with them as well.
Yeah.
That is difficult because they should be with us. Yeah. So as I said, next week will be hard because we will arrive. We will look at that spot in the Camel Estuary where we lost, 2 very precious people. But we will go and visit the graves. We won't talk about what happened. It's too horrific to talk about. But we try, and there's pictures of them all over our house, and we try and talk about them as much as we can.
What's your view on how we sort of approach death and grief, as a society, if you like? Are we getting better at it? Are we having the right conversation, do you think?
I think it's less of a taboo. I think the more we talk about it, it's a bit like mental health, the more we talk about it, the more we're honest about it. People still don't really know what to say. I think that is the problem. And I'm sort of writing a book at the moment, and there is a section on there about what is the right and wrong thing to say, and some of the wrong things that people have said to me, and how to be more kind of helpful about it. But it is the only rule given in life, isn't it? That we will all die. Hopefully, it will be at a normal path in life when we reach old age and 90, and drop dead doing something that we really enjoy doing. But often it's not that way, and we have to. People say, "Oh, live every day like it's your last." Of course, you can't do that. We can plan for what we want our future to be, but we can only control so much in our life. I'm not saying we have to kind of, think, "Oh, we might die at some point," but I'm very aware of my mortality. My children are incredibly aware of my mortality because I am their only parent now.
Yeah.
And so at the beginning, I would get 20, 30 missed calls a night if I went out because one of them would be convinced that I'd died in the car on the way there, because they know from a very young age that bad things can happen.
Yes.
And that's very sad for young children to kind of know that. But in a way, they know a bit more about reality, that awful things do happen. So I try and reassure them that hopefully I will be there to see them get married, see their children, my grandchildren. That would be amazing, but we don't know. So I think we have to be a bit more kind of real about it, but not in a kind of morbid way, if you know what I mean.
Tell me a bit more about the book. What's the thinking behind it?
So again, it's my journey, it's my story. I think it came about because, as I said, I was desperate for a sort of manual of grief, and the only ones I could find were quite sort of dry and linear, and this is what you go through, the 5 stages, and then there were a lot of sad stories about other horrific things that had happened. But mine is hopefully a bit of a manual to hold your hand and let people kind of relate to if they've been through loss, trauma, sudden change, like COVID. But at least with that, we were all in it together, and I very much felt isolated and on my own. But reading anything that I could sort of relate to and go, "Oh my God, I felt like that, and that's what I went through," is so reassuring to know that you're doing something kind of okay, because grief is such a weird place to be. So it is about grief and strategies of coping with any kind of loss or trauma, and hopefully it will help a lot of people. A lot of people can relate to it, but done in a slightly kind of tongue-in-cheek way as well, of funny things that have happened, because sometimes laughter is the only thing that can get us through these horrific kind of dark days.
How important a part has humour played for you?
Massive, actually. I mean, even starting in the hospital, where I think I said in my TED talk, people would kind of say, you know, just come over here and put your feet up. Oh, sorry, not you, because you've only got one now, so foot, or, you know, take it step by step, and you realise how many foot metaphors there are when you've only got one.
That's often the case in a sort of hospital environment, because it's how they're kind of coping themselves to do their jobs, I suppose. But once you'd left hospital, how important did humour continue to be?
You kind of, I remember the first time I properly laughed was on my birthday. So my birthday is the 16th of July, next week actually. And I had my five great girlfriends that were my sort of support crew, who came round, and of course I couldn't walk, Kit couldn't walk. My house and garden had been sort of turned into a slightly kind of old people's home with like wooden ramps everywhere. And I was wheeled out into my garden, and someone had brought around some amazing food, and we sat there and just chatted, and people were telling stories about their past, about my past. It was a great sort of distraction night, and I don't know, for some reason we just all belly laughed all night. And my first reaction was, I kind of woke up the next morning feeling quite guilty. I'd had such a good night but then I just thought, God, I feel like I've had a holiday. That was amazing. I feel like I've been taken out of my real grief, horrific situation.
A proper release.
Right. And been put back in. And it felt so good. I then realised, you know, kind of felt the power of, don't feel guilty about having a good time, because just do anything to get through. You've gone through something so awful and so horrific, whatever it is, that you deserve to have moments and pockets of joy. And I take that with me now. I plan joy into my life, because I've kind of worked out that happiness for me is, we all love the big things, the ski weekend and 50th in Ibiza, whatever it is, but sometimes there's just not quite enough of them to get you through your everyday life. And if I can just get coffee from my favourite coffee place, or a glass of wine with a girlfriend, or, you know, whatever it is at the moment, a dog walk, it's not going to be restaurants and theatre, but, well, it might be now, then make sure I've got enough of them through the week to get through that week. Because if I'm feeling really down, but I'm going to Ibiza for 50th in September, that is way too far away.
Yeah.
I've got to make sure I've got some nice things to look forward to tomorrow.
Victoria, I've no doubt at all that anyone who's listening to this now would want me to pass on their condolences, first and foremost, you know, to you and your family, but also their thanks for sharing your story. As you say, it's only by sort of properly talking about grief and crisis that we can get a bit better at dealing with it. But before you go, I'd like to ask you for your 3 crisis cures. These are 3 things other than another person that you turn to in the difficult moments.
Okay, so I would say, I mean, I've mentioned them already, but for me, step by step, so that small achievable goals, not planning too far ahead into the future, that I think has massively helped me and still does massively help me. That whole area of kind of self-compassion and realising, as Nico did, that we are good enough. Don't wake up in the morning and start your day in a bad way and go, oh, should have got more sleep. I shouldn't have drunk enough, you know, as much, or I should have done more yesterday. It's like, no, start the day in a positive way, and mantras of we are good enough to start the day. And
exercise is a key part of that for you.
Well, that's for me how I start the day in a positive way. And that whole kind of area of nutrition as well, that self-care area. And also just being a little bit selfish. It's like, you know, we have to put ourselves first. We are all natural caregivers, and we do feel good looking after other people, but we have to make sure that we put enough time in for joy, happiness, looking after ourselves. Because if we're not in a good place emotionally and physically, we're not in the right place to look after others as well as we can do. So I think being a little bit selfish is not a bad thing.
Amazing. Victoria, happy birthday for next week.
Thank you.
And thank you once again.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to Crisis What Crisis. Do feel free to email your feedback to info@coulsonpartners.com, where you'll also find the show notes giving you the key insights from our guests. There are more useful conversations on the way, so please do subscribe, and if you like what you hear, give us a rating and a review. Thanks again.